greetings from the fake uncle, of course, then I'd have proven them wrong. I didn't plan on exposing them in public. I'd just write a couple articles about the experience. Why bother, though? Plenty of skeptics throughout history have set out to expose mediums. I mean, Harry Houdini did it over 100 years ago. For me, though, this was personal. I had grown up around people like this. I was raised in the world of evangelical Christianity. It was a far cry from spiritualism, which our pastors described as witchcraft, along with psychics and Zen Buddhism and yoga and Harry Potter. And yet, our church had more in common with spiritualism than we thought. Both groups claimed to have a direct line to the supernatural. We had pastors who would give us personal messages from God, which usually had something to do with reading the Bible more, or not masturbating so much. People in our church knew what God thought about everything, from abortion to the gays to the topless scene in Titanic. Most importantly, they knew how the afterlife worked. They knew who got into heaven and who wouldn't make the cut. As I grew older, it made less and less sense. While I never stopped believing in God, I rejected the cocky self-assuredness of my childhood church. I felt defrauded, betrayed by those who claimed to speak for God, and I was determined never to be duped again. I grew obsessed with exposing anyone who claimed to have a clear view of the supernatural. Of course, I would never be able to travel back in time and tell off my pastors. Still, I could confront people who were similar to them, and that's where the spiritualists come in. I could prove them wrong. I would prove them wrong, and I would publish the story. That Sunday was unusually cloudy. I parked on Adams next to the darkened Ken Cinema, and I found the building Sarah had mentioned, an old Victorian house. I was already imagining the interior. A dark parlor straight out of Disneyland's Haunted Mansion. Black curtains, human skulls, crystal balls. I entered and walked down the long hallway. The floorboards creaked as loudly as they do in every haunted house movie. If you're thinking about walking down that hallway, don't. Coming this summer. And at the end of the hall, where I had been ready to find the skulls and crystal balls, I saw a well-lit living room. About 70 very ordinary-looking people sat in rows of chairs facing a low platform. On the platform was a pulpit, a piano, and 4 women in long white robes, the priestesses of spiritualism. I took my seat quietly and looked around for anything that looked like a Ouija board or a seance table. One of the priestesses sat at the piano and addressed the congregation. You can find the words to the first hymn in your bulletin. Hymn? The first chord sounded oddly familiar. I checked the bulletin. Opening hymn, It Is Well With My Soul? Wait, but that was a normal Christian hymn. I sang it dozens of times in my childhood. Was this really the spiritualist church that Sarah told me about? I felt cheated. Where were the creepy occult symbols, the Ouija boards? Where was all the witchcraft, for Christ's sake? The disillusionment quickly gave way to a soothing opiate comfort. The spiritualist service was exactly like the church services of my childhood. The hymns, the greetings, the feel-good sermon, even the smell of the place was the same as Bethel Baptist Community Church. The combination of aging books, dusty carpet, and bad perfume and cologne. It smelled like church. For a second, I almost forgot where I was. Then a tall brunette minister in her 40s reminded me. She stood at the pulpit after the sermon and announced, "Now is the time for the greetings from Spirit." A hush fell over the crowd. I slowly pulled out my notebook. Giving honor to God and the angel kingdom, the priestess said, "We welcome the messages from Spirit." The other 3 white-robed ministers sat behind her, nodding slowly. After addressing 2 members of the congregation, she pointed at me. "I'm getting a message for you. There are a lot of changes in your life. You need to leave the past behind and focus on becoming the person you really want to be. This was all completely, entirely accurate. It was hard not to take it as a personal message for me until I listened to what she told the other people. Their messages applied to me too, because they were applicable to any human being on the planet. The minister told one young lady to stop and smell the roses and not stress so much. A tall, thin man needed to focus on the positives and ignore the negatives. When she came back to me with another message, it was maddeningly vague. I see something related to work. Either a change in work, or a lot of work, or you're out of work. But something about work in your life. What a crappy message from the spirits. This was the best they could do. Something about work is happening. I came all the way to the gateway of the netherworld for this? After about 20 minutes, the tall priestess was running out of steam. When she addressed a middle-aged man who looked like some kind of accountant, she struck out entirely. I see the letter E. What does that mean to you? Nothing I can think of. But whose name is that? No one's. I don't know anyone with the letter E. I'll just leave you with that E. Disquiet filled the room, people shifting nervously in their seats. A second minister stepped up to the pulpit to spell the tall woman. This one was a kind-faced older woman with short gray hair and ample smile lines. After introducing herself as Reverend Millie and repeating the dedication to the angel kingdom, she immediately called on me. I'd like to address you as well. She smiled beatifically. May I give you a message from Spirit? I nodded. I'm getting the letter S. Does that mean anything to you? Here it goes. My chance to test out the fake ghost on her. I made a surprised face, paused for dramatic effect, and finally I stammered, yes, that's my Uncle Steve. And your Uncle Steve, is he in the body or out of the body? I looked down at my lap. He's passed on. There are a lot of things you had in common with him, aren't there? Absolutely. Your relationship with him wasn't all a bed of roses, though. It was complicated. But you know what? He wants you to focus on the good things. Stay positive, because he's got a lot of surprises in store for you. So the experiment had worked. She sent me a message from a spirit who didn't exist. But still, I felt unsatisfied. I wanted more. When the service ended and the congregants started to leave, I approached Reverend Millie and I introduced myself. I was wondering, Reverend, do you see anything else from my uncle? She gripped my upper arm and closed her eyes for a moment. A peaceful, matronly smile covered her face. I am getting something else now, David. I see an airplane. Does that relate to your Uncle Steve? So I played along. I made up a story about Steve going on a trip and he wouldn't take me with him. I know you want to travel, David, but the real journey is within. She pointed at my heart and she looked into my eyes with nothing but sincerity and kindness. And that inward journey, when you leave the past behind and learn to really be yourself and be free, that's the only journey that matters. And the message hit home, painfully so. I had been trying to break free from the world I was raised in for years. And as I thought about her words, something really strange happened. I started to lose my grip. I couldn't stay detached any longer. The genuine compassion glistened in her eyes. That familiar church smell overwhelmed my senses. Something in the rational part of my brain short-circuited. Emotions and memories were stirred, shaken loose, resurrected. I'm getting another letter, David, she said softly. I see the letter L. She gripped my arm tighter. My guard was coming down. Does the letter L mean anything to you, David? And the reins slipped out of my hands. I let go. Without thinking, I answered her immediately. Yes, that's my dad. My dad's name is Len. And when Reverend Millie said, he's alive, right? I thought, she knows. She's tapped into something. And when she rubbed my arm and said, "Your dad's a good man," I thought, she can see my soul. He's a good person, David, but there's some other stuff between you two. Things aren't always easy with your father, are they? The tears welled up behind my eyes, and I forgot all about trying to test the spiritualists. This woman had the goods on me. I knew it. Because it was all true. Family life wasn't easy. It never was. I thought of all the arguments with my dad growing up, the rumble of hellfire and banishment always lurking in the background. I stared into Reverend Millie's eyes. They shone with kindness and understanding. I was daring to believe. I longed to believe. I wanted to know that this woman had the answers. She had a direct line to God, or the angels, or the spirits, or something, and she had some secret knowledge that would heal all the wounds of the past. A glimmer of hope from early childhood shimmered. It was possible to know what happened after death, to understand the mechanics of the universe. Reverend Millie could make it all better. Life could make sense again. Then I thought about what she was saying about my dad. She had also said the exact same things about my Uncle Steve. I left the church and walked out into the drizzling rain. I had won, of course. I had proven the spiritualists wrong. But in a more significant sense, I had lost. Reverend Millie had given me a taste of eternity, only for it to be ripped from my hands all over again. This was the price of proving her wrong, reliving the loss of childhood faith. Hope handed to me and then taken away. The wound torn open again. I wish I could still believe. I wish Reverend Millie had all the answers. I wish somebody did. But Uncle Steve doesn't exist.
Yeah.